On the subject of regulation, believe it or not, the case of the small Nevada firm challenging the PCAOB has made its way somehow to the
Yes.
docket of the Supreme Court. This actually, a lot of people had dismissed this as sour grapes because they had received an unfavorable audit report from the PCAOB. It's been, I think, through 3 levels of appellate court. Now it has come to the high court. Let me get your reaction. Should the high court rule in favor of the firm and declare the PCAOB's formation and the way the officers were elected unconstitutional?
Well, as appealing as some of our audit partners may think to have the PCAOB ruled unconstitutional because they don't like the inspection process, our belief, my belief personally, and I think their firm's belief, is that the PCAOB is critical. And first of all, let me address the legal issue. It's my understanding that the reason this has gone so far is that there are some constitutional issues here that are from a legal standpoint, valid issues. However, the public policy considerations and the success of the PCAOB over the last few years, I think, overrides that. PCAOB has been hugely successful at changing the profession. While we don't always like those inspections, the fact of the matter is they do change behavior. Our audit partners at Grant Thornton, at all the firms, are very nervous about being inspected. They take the inspections very seriously. We as a firm take the findings very seriously. They impact people's compensation. They impact people's careers. And they impact our firm policies. We have changed firm policies because of PCAOB inspections. So they have made a huge difference in improving the quality at Grant Thornton, but at all the accounting firms. And I think that's critical to this continuing oversight and success of the profession. And it gives us the credibility out there in the marketplace. I mean, this is all about protecting investors and providing good audits so that investors have good information to make decisions. The PCAOB does a good job at protecting investors. Mm-hmm. So we think it should not, the Supreme Court should rule in favor of keeping the PCAOB.
Yes, hopefully by more than a 5-4 majority.
Yes,
right? Something like that. Stephen, I was wondering if you could explain, we have the PCAOB here, a little bit about the regulatory oversight and framework that you had to deal with overseas, and adjusting to the PCAOB here in the U.S.
Well, I had exposure to the PCAOB before I spent time in China. I've spent 15 years of my career here in the United States. So when I moved to China, however, the regulatory environment there is very closely linked to the government, as you might expect, given the political environment. And in fact, the Ministry of Finance really oversees and regulates the Chinese accounting profession. And the CICPA is very closely linked to the Ministry of Finance. It's only quasi-independent. And there is a Securities and Exchange Commission equivalent in China, which is the CSRC. But that's also another department of the government. So there's definitely political influence inevitably in that process in a country like China. And you have to be very much aware of government policy and the direction that the government would like to see the profession go as you develop your plans. Now, fortunately for the profession and for Grant Thornton, the Chinese government is very supportive about growing and developing the profession and improving quality, and has actually looked to the PCAOB and other regulators around the world for best practices. So even though on the surface the government influence could be perceived as a negative, for the most part, my experience was it was being used in a very positive way to develop the profession in China, and they've made great progress.
Mm-hmm. The PCAOB was a little different, however, before you left to go to China. I mean, the Sarbanes-Oxley was not yet implemented in corporations of all sizes. I believe the first couple of years they had a certain threshold where it had to be implemented, and they're still, 7 years later, there are still some people who are not yet complying with 404. Should the Supreme Court rule in favor of the plaintiff and not the defendant, how do you see that changing the regulatory landscape?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things that could happen. I think there's some legislative fixes that could be proposed to fix just this piece and allow the PCAOB to continue. Whether the PCAOB will be able to attract the kind of people that it needs it will be questionable, but certainly there's some options to fix it quickly. But it does raise the question of whether Sarbanes-Oxley will be reassessed, and certainly we would not be supportive of that. We think Sarbanes-Oxley is working and should not be changed.
Mhm. Stephen, you would agree with that? Or?
Yeah, I think this is an unfortunate distraction. I think Ed's right that actually, irrespective of the Supreme Court decision based on the constitutional issue, the reality is that the PCOB or its equivalent is playing an important role and needs to continue. And probably would emerge in a different form, even if the Supreme Court came down with a decision that was not in favor of the constitutional aspects. So, frankly, I see this as an unfortunate distraction. I think we'd all be better off spending our time working with the PCOB to continue to improve the effectiveness of their oversight. You know, we give them suggestions coming out of the process as we think, as to how we think it could be improved. And I'd rather we were spending our time there actually than in this unfortunate legal situation.
Sure. Now, I had mentioned about the Obama administration and the potential legislation that could affect the way the accounting landscape and the way practice. But let's get a little more vertical. Let's talk directly about the tax code. Now, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner has promised that he will simplify the tax code. And Ed, you've been around long enough; you've heard that song a few times before. President Bush had assembled a committee to reform the tax code. They even actually visited our offices once, and they had dozens and dozens of meetings, and then exactly nothing happened from that. Let me get your take on, if the tax code could be simplified, and I know you've made several comments about the tax code. Would you? A lot of people, have just said, all right, let's get us a flat tax, or let's work on repealing the AMT, irrespective of the costs. I'd like to get both your, maybe from an international perspective coming domestically, and then you who has a large tax practice coming over and kind of studying it. I'll start with you, Ed.
All right. Well, usually when Congress tries to simplify the tax code, we usually end up with something much more complicated and much more work for accountants. So it's usually Accountants Relief Act every time there's a simplification, and we appreciate that. There's certainly many loopholes that within the tax code that could be closed, and I think there is an element of simplification that could be introduced, but it's not easy, and we'd be supportive of a simplification. I think a move towards a flat tax is probably oversimplifying the needs of not just the taxpayer, but really the economy in general. The tax code has evolved over years to support different aspects of the economy, to motivate people to buy homes, to motivate people to give to charities. These things are critical to the success of the economy going forward, and to think overnight we would eliminate home mortgage deductions or charitable contributions deductions would wreak havoc on our economy and on the various institutions and organizations that are supported by those deductions. So I don't think complete simplification is really feasible, but I do think I would support the IRS moving to eliminate various loopholes to try to simplify the process. The thing I think we have to watch out for now is because of the increased spending of government, there's probably going to be some tax increases, and how those get applied make us all very nervous.
Tax increases. Now, there's a novel idea, right? Stephen?
Well, I probably do have an interesting perspective, having lived 6 out of the last 15 years in a flat tax environment in Hong Kong. As an individual and as a business person, I can certainly see the merits of dealing with a system that is relatively straightforward to administer and is relatively understandable. And certainly when you look at the tax code in the United States, it has become inordinately complicated, which, as Ed said, is good for our business. But I think if we were to step back and say what's really good for our clients and what's good for the future of the country, I think some form of simplification is past due. And I would certainly like to see us head in that direction. I would like to see, as part of that debate, I think a very interesting concept about moving the tax burden more to consumption rather than on income. I think that's often lost in the discussion around simplification of the code. And I think there is an opportunity to overcome some of these political issues and achieve that. I'm hopeful that some progress could be made, but I'm also skeptical.